Okay, guys, good evening. So it's been a while. I was not able to discuss anything last week, so I'll try to catch up. So without further ado, let us start. For this evening, we will be discussing the extinguishment of obligations. So this is the second module of the law on obligations and contracts. So in this module, students are expected to be able to understand the different methods of extinguishment obligation and their respective application in business operation. So this module is divided into two lessons. So for tonight, we'll be discussing the first one, payment or performance. So I've allotted 2 weeks for this one. So I don't know if I could finish everything tonight, but if not, then we will just we'll continue by next week. Okay. So at the end of the lesson, students are expected to understand how to carry out either payment or performance in extinguishment of obligation. So we're already finished with module one, which talks about obligations, the nature and the different kinds of obligation. And for this module, starting with lesson one, we will discuss how do we carry out payment and performance to extinguish obligation. So, as an introduction, payment and performance may perhaps the most commonly used method of extinguishment. So, pag naiutang, most of the time will just be magbayad lang ta. Or if the utang or the obligation is in a personal manner wherein, for example, kailangan nimo mag-render og service, ikaw mo kanta sa kasal, ikaw ang magbuhat sa balay, then you will just carry out the performance. So if there are obligations, either we pay for it, deliver it, or perform it. So however, beyond that are also different means of payment which we'll be learning in this lesson. So as an activity, assuming that you have 10,000 pesos loan from a friend without any stipulation about payment of interest, so write down at least 3 ways you can pay your obligation. So there, this is an activity. That is why you have to also submit your answer to me not later than Sunday. So let's go directly to our discussion. So Article 1231, obligations are extinguished by payment or performance, by loss of the thing due, by condonation or remission of debt, by confusion or merger of rights of creditor and debtor, by compensation by novation. Other causes of extinguishment of obligation, such as annulment, rescission, fulfillment of resolutory condition, and prescription are governed elsewhere in this code. So, however, we'll be focusing ourselves with the payment or performance. So, meaning of payment. In ordinary parlance, payment refers only to the delivery of money. So, when we talk of payment, bayad, ang first and common interpretation namo will just be the delivery of money, the payment. Okay? However, legally speaking, payment may consist not only of delivery of money but also the giving of a thing. So, if you have the obligation to deliver a scissor and you deliver nimo siya sa imong debtor, sa imong creditor, the debtor will be considered to actually paid, para mang nabayaran na. So, or doing an act. So, again, if you are required to sing a particular song in a particular event, so mo to siya imong obligation and gi-render out nimo imong service, ni kanta ka didto. So, legally speaking, we are still talking of payment. Or if you are required to not do anything, bayaran ka 1,000 pesos, pag puyo lang dira, then nagpuyo lang ka, so meaning, gibuhat nimo ang katong gi-require sa imuha, which is to not do anything, then legally speaking, that is also considered payment. So when debt is considered paid, so kano sa ta makaingon ng usa ka utang is nabayaran na. So a debt, integrity of prestation, a debt to deliver a thing, including money, or render service is not understood to have been paid unless the thing or service has been completely delivered or rendered. So I would simply highlight the word completely. Okay? Which means that uh, if we will be strict about a particular liability or obligation sa ngalan nga dili pa siya completely paid or completely performed, it is generally it is not considered to be paid. So it will only be considered paid if it is completely delivered or rendered. Okay? So that is uh, the general case wherein a debt is considered paid. For example, delivery of 90 sacks of rice instead of 100 as stipulated. So kung 100 ang nakasaad dito without any stipulation niya, pwede siya i-perform partially in the ato siya, the obligor must first deliver the entire 100 sacks in order for payment to occur. So unsa implication ana? The implication is on the part of the creditor, okay, dili siya compelled magbayad. On the part of the one nga magbayad, nag-order sa 100 sacks, dili siya compelled niya magbayad para sa 100 ka sako nga bugas ba ni siya kung wala pa na-deliver ang kinatibuk ang 100. Unless, of course, naa sila'y other agreement. Pero kung ilang lang sabot is just deliver the 100 and mo to siya bayaran, then partial delivery will not be counted again unless if there are other stipulation or further agreement. So identity of the prestation, this second requisite means that the very prestation due must be delivered or performed. Simply stated, kung sa to inyong gisabutan, mao jud to ang inyong i-perform. There will be no other alternative. Dili ka pwede nga kung nagsaad ka og iPhone 12 na ba iPhone 12. Kung iPhone 12 nga latest ang imuhang gisaad, you will not you cannot deliver something else bisan pag mas mahal or mas barato na siya or mas daghan or mas gamay. Kung sa inyong sabot, mao jud to inyong i-perform. So that is the very identity of the prestation. It is important to determine whether or not payment or performance has been complied with because it can be used as basis whether or not to give the corresponding payment. So, ang sabot ninyo is iPhone 12, nag-deliver siya something else kay wala na siya stock. Dili kan niya pwede i-require nga dawatan ni kay mas mahal ba yan ni. At the same time, di po ganyan makumpel nga bayarin ko kay nagdalabi ako ani, okay? Because again, there was no payment made or there was no exact prestation nga iyahang fulfill or deliver. However, there are exemptions. So ato ang gidiscuss ganina ang general rule wherein if there is partial or if it is not the specific prestation, then there can be no payment. However, there is an exemption. In Article 1234, it talks about the recovery allowed in case of substantial performance. So, dili totally partial ang iyahang na-perform, pero substantial man pod. When we talk of substantial, wala siya gitoyo, okay? It was really in the intention of the party nga to really comply, to really deliver the exact thing and completely. But for some fortuitous event nga dili malikayan na ay without any form of malice, then partial lang jud iyahang na comply pero majority man pod, substantial man pod. So if it is the case, if there is substantial performance in good faith, meaning wala jud niya tuyo pero and at the same time gusto jud niya i-fulfill but for some reason, valid reason, di man pwede, on the part of the debtor, he may avail himself of recovery. So he may actually avail of a partial payment as well from the creditor. So there is a substantial performance when the important or essential part of the contract, so katong importante na portion, has been completely performed and only a small or minor part thereof has not been carried out. For example, magpa-construct ka og balay and unfortunately, nakulangan og tiles. Nasugdan na og tiles pero nakulangan because wala na available, wala na mapalit or padulong pa ang stock. So may bisan pag moingon ka nga ay wa pa man dili pa man complete, di pa man full. The contractor may actually request or demand a portion of the payment because wa man tutuyo and at the same time it is in their intention nga humanon but for some valid reason wala na human, then they could actually demand. So it is also to protect the interest of those party in good faith nga wa man to nila tuyo and gusto man unta nila humanon but again wala man dili man siya ma-comply for some again valid reasons. This exemption can only be availed if the debtor have the following requisites. Again, there must be substantial performance. And the obligor is in good faith. There's no malice. Wala siya intention nga manglamang, makadaot, or makatikas. So in good faith siya. So kung yan nanang duha, then they could demand. Good faith is always presumed in the absence of proof to the contrary. So what does this mean? It means na kung wala na human, we will always assume nga wala tuyo Okay, wala gituyo. Unless na kay katibayan or proof nga makaingon ka nga pag tinuyuan yun to nga wala human na. Gusto yun niya nga makakos og gubot or gusto niya nga makatikas ako matong wa niya human na niya nangayon dayon sa og bayad. So kung na kay mga proof nga ing ana, then pwede nimo siya dili bayaran for the meantime. Siyempre nahuman na gud imong balay sa atong example or partially nahuman na nga di nimo bayaran tungod lang kay kuan na kulang og tiles. So unfair po sa ilahang part. So pwede nimo dili bayaran for now. Pero pag ma-accomplish na, then siyempre bayaran nimo lain pod. For example, Vina obliged herself to deliver 500 bags of cement to Bruce for 300 pesos per sack. However, despite the diligent efforts on her part, Vina was only able to deliver 400. So out of the 500 nga gisabot, 400 lang ang iyang na-deliver because shortage of supply. Wala tuyo 400 lang yun ang niabot. So it is important to take note that Vina wanted to comply. She wanted to deliver the whole 500. But again, for some valid reason nga short ang supply, 400 ang iyang na-deliver. Thus, in this example, Vina may still be able to recover the amount equivalent to 400 bags, which is 120,000. 400 times 300 pesos. Recovery allowed when incomplete or irregular performance waived. This is also another exemption to the general rule. If the payment is incomplete or irregular, or if the performance is incomplete or irregular, the creditor may properly reject it. So this is a waiver on the part of the creditor. Meaning, balik ta sa katong balay nga wala na human, kulangan og tiles. So the contractor approach you, the foreman approach you, sir, ma'am, short pa jud og tiles, pabuton pa jud pod namo. Okay? Tapos naingon si creditor nga or naingon si ang nag-esabel, ay sige kana na lang. Ako amon anong dawaton, ayaw na lang ninyo tiwasa. Kay probably short og budget or for whatever reason na sila laing plano. Gi-wave nila, meaning gidawat nila as it is nga kulang nga wala pa nahuman and basically they wave. So dawat sila, nisugot sila nga dili na humanon or nga kulang. So in the case of acceptance, nga gidawat naman nila, the law considers that he waives his right, the whole obligation is extinguished. And therefore, the contracted amount may be demanded. Question, ang whole amount ba ang pwede ang i-demand sa contractor do not take this as an expert advice. Again, disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, but that the way this has been explained is, yes, the contractor, the foreman in our example could actually demand for the whole payment. But of course, if Pinoy to sila, then they could just demand for that particular amount equivalent lang po sa ilahang nahuman. Kaya ang point, this is an exemption because again, gidawat nga kulang. So since gidawat man nga kulang and our agreement was say 2 million for the construction of the entire house, then gidawat man nila nga kulang, so they will really have to pay the whole amount. I don't know if nagets niyo akong explanation, but that's it. So requisites for the application 1235. So when can we apply this one? When can we make singil if it is incomplete or irregular? So the obligee or the creditor knows that the performance is incomplete or irregular. Kabalo siya, gingnan siya, aware siya nga wala na human or kulang. He accepts the performance without expressing any protest. Dawat na siya, nisugot siya. So, just example, Bell agreed to paint the house of Yeti. According to their agreement, Bell would use a royal blue paint. If Yeti accepted the performance of Bell knowing that he used a green paint and without any objection or negative reaction, then the obligation is deemed fully complied with. So, ang sabot is royal blue. Pero ang napintura is green. But then again, the obligee, in this case, si Yeti, nisugot man siya nga, okay na, nindot man day. Then, even if irregular, even if dili mao, then sa ngalan nga ihang gidawat without any form of protest, then the obligation is deemed fully complied with. And then, Yeti can demand, Bell can demand the full amount of the payment. Payment by a third person does not intend to be reimbursed. Okay? So, what will happen in Article 1238? What happens in Article 1238? There is a third person, okay? There is a third person, a person nga dili si debtor, dili si creditor, na iyahang gibayaran ang obligation. Pero, dili siya magpabayad. Okay, kung mag-donate niya, no? So if a third person pays a particular debt without the intention of being reimbursed, the payment is deemed a donation provided the debtor gave his consent. Okay? It will be considered as a donation if the debtor, for example, in this case, si A, nasa utang kay B, 10,000 pesos. Here comes si C, iyang gibayaran ng utang. Tapos, iyang gibayaran ng utang tapos dili na siya magpabayad with the consent of A. In that case, it becomes a donation. So the obligation will be extinguished and wala po utang si A kay C na naman because gi-donate man to. Ito sa donation and wala man siya intention nga magpa-reimburse. However, if the debtor did not give any consent, kumbaga gibayaran lang ni C diretso kay B, wala kabalo si A or wala jud ni sugot unta si A, the third person may recover the same amount from the debtor. So if in that case gibayaran ni C ang 10,000 pesos pero walay consent or against sa will ni A, pwede actually makapaningil si C kay A. It's quite complicated, no? Murag gibayaran na gani mo utang, di pa jud ka mosugot. So kung dili siya mosugot or kung wala siya kabalo, then ang iyang ibayad kay B, pwede na niya ibayad kay C. And actually, si C, pwede po niya kolektahon kay A. So you just read this one, it will just be the same. Another one is 1239, free disposal of the thing due and capacity to alienate required. So as a rule, in obligations to give, if the payment is if the payment will entail the the giving of an object, payment by someone who does not have free disposition of the thing due and capacity to alienate it is not valid. Take for example, I don't know if naba ko example dire. Yan ang example sa baba. This means that the thing paid can be recovered. Article 1239 talks about an obligation to deliver or give a particular object. Now, before you could actually give the object subject to the obligation or the prestation of the obligation, we have to take into account if ang katong person ba nga liable naa ba siya'y capacity to alienate the object. Meaning, naa ba siya'y free disposition. Or simply stated, iyaha ba to? Iyaha ba tong butanga nga pag i-deliver niya, makatransfer siya, naa siya'y capacity nga makatransfer sa ownership, and na po siya'y capacity to nasa free disposition to deliver and transfer ownership of the object. Kay kung wala, bisan pag ihatod to didto sa ngalan nga dili siya ang tag-iya o that particular object, then the delivery of the object can be recovered. Free disposal of the thing due means the thing to be delivered must be free from any claims, lien, or encumbrances. Katong butanga na prestation of the obligation free from any claim. Kumbaga, an example would be, kana nga butang, kana nga motora, wala na siya naka-mortgage, wala na siya giprinda, wala na siya gibaligya sa lain, or wala na siya gi-promise nga ihatag sa lain. Imuha jud na siya. Okay, with free to any claim. The capacity to alienate means that the person is not incapacitated to enter into contract. So the debtor in this case nga na obligation mo hatod or mohatag og motor is actually of legal age nga na ay capacity to enter into a contract. Kay if for example minor na siya tapos siya ang na obligation to deliver the motorcycle, even if mahatod tong motorcycle sa creditor, pwede to actually bawion because the debtor in that particular obligation is incapacitated. Kaya minor man siya. Example, Zoro agreed to sell to Sanjay a television set. So, Zoro has the obligation to deliver Sanjay a television set in exchange of money. So if the TV set delivered by Zoro actually belongs to Robin, meaning dili day to iyahang gihatod, then meaning ang katong object is not free from any claim. Kay Robin man to, di man to pwede i-dispose ni Zoro. Robin, who is the actual owner of the TV, can actually take back the TV. No payment has also been made since Zoro did not have the free disposal of the TV set. Dili po siya pwede mag-demand o payment kay Sanji kay in the first place, di man to iyang TV. So, bisan pag ihatod na to niya nga TV, sa nga niya dili man to iyaha, wala yapon. So, this is why it is important to verify the ownership of an object and the obligation in the person transacting it. So, before ka mapalit og motor, before ka mapalit og anything, laptop, balay, yuta, situit nga imong ka-transact has the free disposal of the thing. Meaning, siya jud tong tag-iya or kung dili man siya, authorized jud siya nga mobaligya or mo-deliver sa kanang object. And at the same time, they are of legal age. Or sila, basically sila jud ang nakatungod nga or na authority nga mo transact ana nga butanga. So person-to-whom payment shall be made. So when we talk of payment, of course, dili pwede kalimtan nga asa na to ibayad. sa atong giutangan, okay? Obviously, sa ato ang giutangan. But there are instances wherein pwede na to siya ibayad somewhere else or to someone else. First and foremost, of course, sa katong giutangan. Kaya kinsa nato ibayad, atong giutangan. Kaya kinsa nato dapat i-perform sa atong gisaaran. Or if wala siya, his or her successor in interest. So probably iyahang anak of legal age, iyahang asawa, iyang bana, or iyang abogado, or other assigned personnel. Or if wala tong creditor, wala po siya mga successor, anyone authorized to receive it. Iyang guardian, probably. So kung minor to siya, iyang guardian, iyang tito, iyang tita, iyahang kung na ba siya ay administrator or executor sa iyang mga property, then sa iyaha or abogado, pwede na to ibayad sa ilaha. So again, kay kinsa na to ibayad sa atong giutangan, sa iyahang successor, asawa, anak, or if wala, mga other authorized person, so abogado, guardian. So Daniel owes Charlie 10,000 pesos. In this case, Daniel must pay to Charlie or any person authorized by him in case of his death, as children, spouse, or lawyer. So wala nawala ang utang. Kaya naman kay na may laing tao nga pwede mo dawat sa bayad. Assuming that when Daniel went to Charlie's house, nobody is around, and he just left the payment to Charlie's neighbor, Henry, will the payment extinguish the obligation? So for example, ito sa balay, magbayad na ta, wala man siya dito, so ato na lang gitugon sa owner, sa silingan. Bay, silingan man ni ni Charlie? Oh, nga naman. So sa imo na lang ako ibilin akong bayad sa iya ha. So nakahatag dag kwarta kay Henry. Question, does it extinguish the obligation? The answer is no, since Henry is not an authorized person. So pwede ta actually maningil usab kay Daniel kay dili man niya wa man niya gibayad sa tuwa, wa man niya gibayad sa atong successor, wa man po niya gibayad sa authorized person. Gibayad niya kay Henry who is none of the above. And so the obligation will continue to exist or persist. So the effect of payment to an incapacitated person. So what will happen if payment is made to an incapacitated person? So payment made to such persons are not valid unless such incapacitated person kept the thing paid or delivered or was benefited by the payment. So pag adto nato sa ilang balay, ni Charlie, wala siya. Tapos iya ang anak lang ang naa. Sir, dili day pwede nga ang, di ba naingon man to dito nga pwede anak? Yes, pwede ang anak provided that they are of legal age because then again, if they are still minors, they cannot receive payment, they cannot enter into a contract. They are incapacitated in the eyes of the law. Okay? So, what will happen if sa iyang anak nga minor na to nabayad? Payment to such person are not valid unless they kept the thing paid. So gitaguan lang nila ang kwarta and or delivered. Gitaguan nila ang kwarta tapos gihatod nila sa ilang papa nga si Charlie. So okay lang to. Pero what if wala nila gihatod tapos gigasto nila, nipalit sila og let's say pagkaon. So it will actually be valid up to the amount benefited by the minor. For example, sa 10,000 pesos ng utang, nipalit siya bali 100 niya pan, iyang gikaon. So it is paid up to the 100 pesos only. So in the absence of this benefit, the debtor may be made to pay again. Okay? So dili siya pwede mo ingon niya, ako naman tong gibayad sa imong anak. Yung moingon ng anak nga moingon ng anak nga unsa ni? Wala, kuan ba to kanang nawala ba yan ako ang kwarta? Question, pwede ba maningil si Charlie usab kay sa ganito? Kay Daniel? The answer is yes because payment to an incapacitated person is not valid. Sheila delivers 1,000 to Marcos' 10-year-old son, Eugene, in payment of the debt. Eugene misplaced the 500 while the other was given to his father. In this case, only the extent of the 500 is considered paid. Si Moro man ang hatag sa papa. As to the 500, mambot, asa na butang sa bata. So, be reminded of that. So, what if it is to a third person, a person nga related sa imuha? Payment to a third person or wrong party is not valid except if the creditor was able to benefit from such payment. However, the debtor must be the one to prove that such benefit exists. Okay? Generally speaking, kung nabayad sa third person, in this case, sa silingan, then, or sa tao nga nagpaila nga igsuon niya, third person gihapon. So the payment is invalid. So sa ngalan niya invalid, pwede na makapaningil na pud usab. But if the creditor was able to benefit, so take for example, gikuha lagi sa katong silingan nimo. Iya man pong gilibre balik sa imo ha. So naka-benefit ka. Ipalit niya grocery. Okay? So in that particular instance, the payment was made up to the amount nga na benefit. So sa 10,000 nga gibayad sa imuha, 8,000 kay ang 5,000 kay gi-grocery sa imong silingan, gihatag kunuhay sa imuha. So it is as if that you were paid up to 5,000. As to the remaining 5,000, pwede ka maningil na pud usab. Kay payment to third person is not valid. So Axel is indebted to Ramon in the amount of 1,000 pesos. On the date of that maturity, Axel made payment to Trisha, Ramon's neighbor. In this case, Axel is still liable to the amount of 1,000. Again, pwede gyapon siya paninglan because payment to a third person is invalid. However, if Trisha delivered 700 to Ramon, the payment is only valid to the extent of 700. But Axel must provide proof that the 700 was indeed delivered to Ramon. So, supposedly nga sa 1,000 nga gihatag ni Axel kay Trisha, 700 lang naabot kay Ramon. Okay? So, 700, Ramon was able to benefit from the money up to 700 pesos only. Question, pwede ba niya paninglan si Axel of 1,000? Usab. The answer is yes. Pero kung makaprovide si Axel og ebidensya that Ramon was able to benefit up to 700 pesos, then 300 na lang ang ibayad ni Axel. Pero kung dili niya kaya na pamatud-an na naka-benefit si Ramon sa kwarta nga iyang gibayad kay Trisha, then Axel will be liable for 1,000 pesos. Okay? So payment to per third person in possession of the credit. So in this case, Article 1242, this is quite complicated. So what if, there is a example. Grace is indebted to Erica in the amount of 1,000 pesos. Isa Grace ang naiutang kay Erica. Grace debtor, Erica creditor, which is evidenced by a promissory note. Sa pagpangutang ni Grace kay Erica og 1,000 pesos, Grace issued a promissory note. Ang sulat siya, yatag niya kay Grace para pamatuod niya utangan si Grace sa iyaha. So due to an unfortunate event, Erica lost the promissory note, which was later found by Dave, who then went to Grace and demanded payment. So nawala ang promissory note na adto kay Dave. Kay nakabutang man sa promissory note kay Kuan. Nakabutang sa promissory note kay payment to the bearer, something like that. Ang pasabot ana kung kinsay nagunit ato nga papel sa iyaha ibayad. Okay? So sa ngalan niya na kay Dave ang papel, nya kailan niya si Grace, nangayo siya payment. And Grace actually paid the amount. So what will happen? So it must be observed that possession refers to the credit itself and not merely the document or instrument evidencing credit. Furthermore, the payer must also act in good faith. That is the honest belief that he is making a valid payment. Okay? So in our example wherein the promissory note is nakabutang is payment to the bearer thereof. Payment to Dave will actually be valid kay sa ngalan nga naa kay Dave man ang promissory note nga gihatag ni Grace and nakabutang dito is payment to the bearer kung kinsa daw naggunit ato nga papel mao'y bayaran tapos uh, Grace honestly believe nga nakuha dito ni Dave in good faith, then the payment of the 1,000 will be valid. Pero if the promissory is stated in a way nga payment one saan pag-state I promise to pay 1,000 pesos to Erica. Kaya naka-state nga yung ana nga kay Erica jud sa dapat ibayad. Tapos kidala ni Dave dito kay Grace. So Dave could not Grace may refuse to pay Dave because even if nasa iyang evidence sa credit, it does not mean nga siya na pod ang tag-iya sa utang. Okay? So muna ganyan nga, payment to Dave is not valid because though he holds the promissory, so even if si Grace nakabayad kay Dave tapos ang iyahang utang is, ang promissory note is, I promise to pay 1,000 pesos to Grace at to Erica, it is not valid because ang gidala lang man ni Dave is ang evidence of the credit, not the credit itself. Okay? Ang pasabot ana is, ang promissory note lang iyahang gidala. Pero, as evidence by the statement didto, dili jud siya ang naay katungod mo kolekta sa utang. I don't know. I don't know if nasabtan mo to ninyo, but for clarifications, please write down sa comments or ask me in the group chat. So we also have special forms of payment. Let us see kung taas-taas pa niya. Taas pa ba ni? Taas pa dyan day. Ayan. So let's just, I will just be giving an introduction of these special forms of payment. So there are 4 special forms of payment under the Civil Code. So namely, dation in payment, 1245, application of payments, 1253, payment by cession, 1255, and tender of payment and consignation, articles 1256 to 1261. So let us just end here. We still have we can still continue this one by next week. But for now, you could read in advance what are these so that tuloy-tuloy ang atong discussion by next week. So that would be all. Good night, guys.